Yep, I just press the recording button. All right, let's start. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Designing Literacy Instruction for Today's Multilingual Learners, presented by Nonie LeSaux. Before we get started, I'd like to have a minute to go over some of the functionality of the webinar platform. First off, at the bottom of your screen, you will notice that there are several icons. The first button on the left, is the chat function. Lots of you actually are using the chat function now, but just be sure to send your message to everyone, okay? To ensure that the whole group can read your message. And as a reminder, please keep the chat focused on the session. And then on the right, you will see a Q&A button. Please use this to ask the presenter, Nonie, or the host, me, okay, questions. And we will do our best to answer questions as they come in. We will also have a dedicated time at the end of the session to go through all the questions. Finally, we'll be sending along a certificate of attendance and a recording of the session within 5 business days of the webinar. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Nonie LeSaux. Nonie is Roy E. Larson Professor of Education and Human Development at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Her research focused on promoting the language and literacy skills of today's children from diverse linguistic, cultural, and economic backgrounds. Nonie's work has earned her the William T. Grant Scholars Award and the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, the highest honor given by the United States government to young professionals beginning their independent research careers. Nonie's research appears in numerous scholarly publications, and its practical applications are featured in 3 books. She is also the author of a widely circulated state literacy report that forms the basis for a 3rd grade reading proficiency bill passed in Massachusetts. She is also the series editor of Lift and co-author of Reach Higher, both from National Geographic Learning. So welcome, Nonie.
Thank you so very, very much, and for the warm welcome, but also for this inspirational gathering from around the world. What a pleasure and a privilege to be here. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Some of you said good night after this webinar. It will be good night from Boston. It's been a wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous fall day here in Boston. I hope you're all doing very well. I'm so looking forward to this conversation with you all at a moment in time that feels especially pressing and important and inspirational at the same time. So, you know, as we think about and look ahead towards educating the next generation at a moment in time when we couldn't be more globalized, but also at a pivot point for education, for public health, for the world. And as we look ahead, I am just honored and grateful to have this conversation with you about where today's conversation is at with respect to designing literacy instruction for today's multilingual learners. So what I wanted to do today, and certainly, oops, I'm so sorry. I just stopped sharing my screen. Hang on, apologies. Let me see what happened. There we go. Let's see. There we go. Sorry about that. So what I wanted to do today is engage in a conversation about what's needed for effective instruction in today's global, linguistically diverse context. And I want to spotlight what we've been thinking about as some key shifts in learning and teaching for student success. And I look forward to your engagement, your interaction, your participation, your insights as part of our learning community. So why would I present tonight, today, this morning, depending on where you are, key shifts in literacy instruction? Well, first of all, we are at a moment in time in history of our world when millions of students today from very diverse backgrounds from all over the world share this common goal of attaining academic success in English. And this population is completely diverse, characterized by vast diversity of backgrounds and experiences. At the same time as those population shifts, we have globalization, economic and social development that demand new skills, that today's youth need advanced literacy and communication skills. They need critical thinking and problem solving skills. They need global and cultural knowledge and competencies. And you might say to yourself, I'm not surprised. Hasn't that always been the case? Not for everybody, not to the level that I'm going to talk about today, which is to say, the baseline expectations, the game overall has changed. And what's needed to be successful is very much a different skill set than even 20 years ago. With that landscape in mind, the demographics and the shifts in terms of the workforce and the societal skills and competencies that are driving success. With those two together, we now look to the model itself, and we can say to ourselves fairly certainly, with real certainty, that the model of literacy instruction in these linguistically diverse contexts has not kept pace with these rapid changes. Through no fault of anyone's, through no one institution's fault, tremendous change, rapid change, transformative change in a relatively very short period of time. That means there is a pressing need to rethink the approach overall. And that's what I would like to engage us all in today. So just in case a few numbers help some of you with us here in this webinar, just 10 years ago, for example, we had not quite 8,000 international schools. We had about 3.5 million students, and we had students in those schools who were largely children and youth from expat families. Fast forward to today, we have more like 12,500 of those international schools. We have close to 6 million such students, and 80% of those students are from the school's host country. They are residents seeking this education. 10 years from now, those numbers are estimated to have just about doubled, right? So we'd be around 16,000 schools, about 8.75, 9 million students. And that's worldwide. This is a very, very global landscape. With this, we have, with this kind of globalization, social and economic development, this has tracked with the need for new skills of the next generation. This kind of seismic change has also tracked, of course, with automatization, with technology, with the way in which technology has revolutionized the workplace, the labor market, right? The way in which we carry out our daily lives. As a result, we're looking to the next generation as needing advanced literacy and communication skills, critical thinking and problem solving skills, and those global and cultural knowledge and competencies. So what do I mean when I say there's a new set of skills? Well, at core, the major difference from even 20 years ago is that what counts as quote unquote literate is on the rise. That we need increasingly sophisticated literacy, communication skills to thrive day to day. That we've got to communicate in very diverse ways with very diverse audiences, just as a baseline expectation. That we have this new role of language and literacy skills in society, in our neighborhoods, in the global world. So there was just to be very concrete about this, particularly in our developed countries, but no different in a lot of other countries as well. Just 20 years ago, very basic literacy skills, 8th, 10th grade skills, were a perfectly straight line. They were a tool for a middle income profession and lifestyle. And that is no longer the case. Just as one major example, concretely, there was a time just 20 years ago when the basic skills, the basic literacy skills, were a tool for driving into a middle income lifestyle. And that is no longer the case at scale. What has happened here, as I alluded to just a moment ago, is that we've got computers and technology and artificial intelligence and automatization that has changed the way what we need of humans to carry out the work in our societies and economies. So in other words, what our labor economists are saying here is, if we are going to prepare young people to do those jobs that the computers and the technology cannot do, then we've got to get focused around giving our students foundational skills for tomorrow. That is the problem solving and the communication that computers don't have, right? So we've got the tech work and the human work. And we want the two to work together. And the human work is going to have to complement and extend on the tech. So for those of you who like to see things in pictures, you can see here a graph of, say, a 50-year snapshot of the work tasks in the knowledge economy, that as the knowledge economy was evolving and transforming and arriving, you can see those jobs that were fastest growing were those jobs that demanded two primary skill sets. One, working with new information, and two, solving unstructured problems. And you can see at the same time, this precipitous decline, this rapid decline in jobs that demand routine manual tasks, routine cognitive tasks, and even non-routine manual tasks, because you'll remember that we have machine learning, right? That it's not even just the manual labor that has been taken over, but even some of the lower level cognition is better done by the machinery, right? So now we have a workforce and an economy, a knowledge economy, where we're asking for competencies around working with new information and solving unstructured problems. And if we take that a step farther, there's one more skill set, which is our ability to combine the cognitive and the social skills. That today, not only are we solving those unstructured problems, those problems that lack the rule-based solutions, not only are we working with new information for problem solving or to influence directionality and decisions of others or big picture solutions, but we're also working in really fluid kind of work environments, mostly team-based. We need good, strong collaboration and communication skills to work with others in our environments. And that piece around the cognitive and the social and the work in teams has been also a major revolution. Sectors like medicine and education that used to be sectors organized around individual practitioners and individual practice have themselves reorganized around the work of groups and teams. And that demands a certain skill set that we want to think about in educational contexts. So if we unpack for just a moment this notion of solving unstructured problems, right? There are teams every day working in our large cities thinking about the design of transportation systems that need big data, but that also need to do lots of data modeling, and then also need to come up with lots of different proposals for solutions where there is no one single optimal solution, but rather likely many that are going to demand discussion of trade-offs. We have teams in medical environments looking at data together. We have coordination of care across the medical sector, where we see lots of work on unstructured problems. We see now that the trades themselves, a lot of vocational industries have also been revolutionized by technology, because we can do so much more research. We have digitized tools. We've got to draft that memo after the home visit to make a diagnosis or to suggest next steps. In all of these cases, there are some 21st century educational standards at play, right? We're writing informative and explanatory text either to convey or examine some complex ideas. We're looking at information clearly and actively through to effective solutions. We're organizing, we're analyzing content. On the working with new information front, right, the same idea is true here again, that we're constantly looking to integrate and evaluate information that is often presented in various media and formats that could be visual, it could be quantitative, it could be oral. We're using all kinds of information. In fact, of course, one of the challenges today is to sort through information, degrees of confidence around the sources, et cetera, right? And to drive into problem solving, and working with others. When we think about this combining cognitive and social skills, I think one real transformation over the last 2 decades, as an example, in the same way that we might track the overall changes, is just that there was also a time when there were very technical jobs that we thought of as not social. Many, for example, in the STEM domain, that today, of course, have also been changed rapidly and demand often a social element, a degree of social interaction, right? And drawing and pulling on both cognitive and social skills at once. When we talk about combining cognitive and social skills, we're thinking of at least 2 different buckets, right? At the level of the individual, we have my interpersonal skills, my ability to work with and relate to others, my ability to take their perspective when I go to make a presentation or write an email or write a memo or sit around a conference table and discuss, right? I'm managing my airtime, I'm picking up verbal cues, visual, non-verbal cues. I'm collaborating in pursuit of a common objective. I have those team-based skills, collaborative skills. I'm practicing my leadership, I'm practicing my communication. At the intrapersonal, right, it's more about my own my own set of competencies, my own analytic skills, my own problem-solving skills, my sort of can do? How do I relate to others? Where am I in terms of my learning style and my motivation and attitude even? And so we're going to think about and make sure we're sufficiently complex when we think about this term social skills. And I've heard recently some folks in the labor economists sort of say there's the hard skills and the human skills. I mean, there's different ways, different terminology, but you get where I'm going with this. We see lots of these skills and competencies, particularly in the global and cultural competencies domain. We see them showing up in all kinds of frameworks and vision statements and aspirations for our youth to get them to where we want to be and to give us some guideposts and some ideas about how this might work day to day. So with that sort of sets the stage for why I'd like to talk more about then what this means for the learning environment and some specific shifts that we ought to consider together as a learning community. So right now, I'd like to pause. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. How does this context and information connect to your own work? Let's hear it. There's a lot here to think about. We're a very global community today on this webinar, and I'd love to hear from you in the chat. How does this connect? What are you thinking about when I'm speaking of this context? Any particular issues that you're especially struck by or thinking about? Sets of skills? What comes to mind? Yep. So Anthony's saying, how do we drive into even some hybrid models of learning, right? And how do we capitalize on the technology and leverage some of this technology that brings all of us together? No question. But also, we've all had to learn some new communicative competencies, right, with this remote world. What else are folks thinking about when you think about this context, this information, these new skills? Yep, where does the tech fit in the teaching? Yep, and how to use different tools, no question. So when we get into the learning environments and some of these shifts, it demands a different approach, and that means different tools in the toolkit for sure. And I'll say more about how we might think about the materials and the media. Yep. Preparing our students through group work and problem solving is critical. It's paramount, right? We don't learn this on the job. It's not ideal to learn on the job 20 years later. We would be much better practicing these communicative and collaborative skills in the classroom. It also, of course, is a very good fit for child and youth development, right? The learning is social is certainly central from early childhood through to adolescence. Absolutely, no question. Thank you. I'm going to keep moving in the interest of time. And let me shift gears to this to the main part of our discussion today, which is as we think then about the model for literacy instruction and the ways perhaps it hasn't kept pace with these rapid changes, what do we think about when we say there's a pressing need to rethink the approach overall? So I'm going to zoom out big, and then I'm going to get a little more specific as we go along. But when I think about how to match instruction to today's context, there is a challenge and an opportunity at hand, which is that we want to design learning environments and curricula that match those skills and students' needs and goals. And the truth is they can come together really well in a lot of settings if we really work hard at this. So I'm going to suggest that we look together at this in two ways. One, what does this learning environment look and feel like? And two, more granular, what does this mean for the instructional approach and materials? So let's zoom out for just a moment and talk big picture, kind of visioning, design principles. what does this learning environment look and feel like? Well, I am going to argue that we are going to necessarily have to keep moving towards an even more dynamic, relevant, and applied teaching model. That we are going to go for the language, literacy, and communicative skills and competencies, the creative thinking and cognitive flexibility, the collaborative problem solving. Getting there necessarily means a more dynamic, relevant, and applied teaching model. And we may be 3/4 of the way there in some settings, and we've got to keep going. And in other settings, we may have room to grow even further. But at every level on that continuum, I would argue there is room for growth further. So we are looking for environments in this kind of a model. We have learners who are very mentally active, who are engaged, who are socially interactive, and who are building meaningful connections to their lives. So I'm connecting today through this content to my life and my context, and maybe the context that I'm interested in studying about, that as they relate to my peers and my community. But I'm also thinking about my future self in these contexts as well, and through these learning experiences. Big picture again, on the visioning and design principle, we're going for depth of learning, right? Where we're placing concepts or themes at the center. We're going to promote that complex understanding. That drives into then this, what I think of as process over mastery, that we are going for process learning, where students are in environments that I think of as facilitated, and that they are grappling with ideas and learning from mistakes. And these environments are necessarily interactive, right? That if we're going to drive up communicative competencies, literacy competencies, collaborative problem solving, communication skills with others, we are necessarily interacting, and the learning itself is interactive. So here's what we're going to do to have a little fun together in this session. We're going to launch a poll in just a moment, and you're going to take temperature. You're going to respond to this prompt in the poll, and the prompt is as follows. In my work, I am connected to learning and teaching that places 21st century skills and experiences at the center. 1, is this an area of growth? 2, would you rate it fair? 3, would you rate it good? Or 4, would you rate it an area of strength? And I just love to hear from all of you. Where are you at, in the learning and teaching that you're connected to day to day? Where do 21st century skills and experiences fit in this model? Are they at the core, at the center? Or is this an area of growth? Let's rate it. Let's get a bunch of results and get to better know the context in which we're all coming together today. So we've got the poll rolling. Can let us know where we're at in terms of numbers. Maybe we'll try to get to 50% or so. How are we doing? How are we doing, Kitty? Okay, great. So we are sort of mixed here, right? We're spread across the spectrum. We've got a number of you, 36% responding, sort of suggesting this is an area of growth. 23% suggesting we're fair. I'd rate it fair. 32% rated good. And 9% area of strength. That makes great sense to me. Again, we're trying to now move to a model that sort of catches up in many ways and at the same time aims to get ahead of these kinds of changes and shifts, and that will continue in a lot of ways. So thank you. Thanks for participating. I can see here that we have a good varied learning community that we're thinking about this in different ways. Let's keep moving along, and I'm going to take it to the next level of granularity, if you will, and I'm going to talk now for a few minutes about what exactly this means for the instructional approach, the pedagogy, the role of the educator and teacher, and what about the materials? What does this look like? How does this look and feel on the ground in classrooms? My feature examples here come from this partnership and collaboration that I've had for more than a decade with National Geographic Learning, and in many ways sort of embodies really this shared mission, which is to bring content-rich, engaging instruction to our multilingual learners. And I will say that even in the last decade, this model itself has also evolved as we have learned more and more about how this might best work and what this might look like. So I'm going to introduce these 4 key design shifts, and I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions to them as well. So I'm going to give you the big overview, and then I'm going to unpack each one. Big picture, I would say this boils down to these 4 key shifts here. One is from a traditional ESL model that is really about the individual learner, that we've really anchored for decades the model on the instruction at the level of the learner and the task at the level of the individual, to what I would say is now an advanced literacy learning environment, that we are anchoring our design work at the level of the classroom setting rather than the individual. Second, I would say we're moving from wide variation in text levels that we put in front of the learner to on grade level text with scaffolds, right? And opportunities to bridge into and scaffold into that text. We are also moving from a model that often prioritizes, for all kinds of good reason, has prioritized what I think of as coverage and volume, and going now to the deeper learning and engagement, the sort of less is more kind of approach to our instruction and our instructional materials. And finally, we have for decades had a fairly literature, often US-based centric model in terms of content, and we are moving to a much more global content approach with varied genres and media, and we are ensuring that we are talking about a wide range of genres and media, of formats, digital, manual, of different types of literacy. So let me say more about this first shift, which is from that basic English language instruction for individuals to organizing for advanced communication and literacy learning in a collaborative environment. And of course, we are still aiming to teach basic language, but the way in which that occurs and the level at which we think about the basic instruction sits in this larger approach that is more about the environment and getting to the advanced levels. So in some ways, we're moving from what we think of as maybe a narrow focus on that basic English language instruction or traditional ESL for individual students, which is still going to be a part of the model, but it is not the core of the model, that in the end, these competencies, the language, the literacy and communication, the creative thinking, cognitive flexibility, the collaborative problem solving, We are working on those in the context of a learning environment that helps our students develop those skills. And of course, the basic English is a stepping stone, but it is not the end game and the end goal. So in the end, we have this wider focus or wider lens. Getting there means that, in fact, for the materials, right, we are now organizing around units of study with content-rich themes and texts. We are providing rigor and challenge in that very supportive context that is about process over mastery, where we are having students grapple with ideas learned from mistakes. We are in many ways combining explicit instruction, sort of traditional direct instruction, with a big emphasis on inquiry-based learning, such that we can drive up the critical thinking, the working with new information, the solving unstructured problems. That kind of learning is not driven by very explicit direct instruction as much as it's driven by the tasks that are collaborative and research-based in the environment, where we are grappling with ideas, concepts, questions that do not have easy answers. To get there means we're using consistent routines and language. We're supporting peer-to-peer interaction. And overall, we are attending to the learner and engaging in very culturally responsive learning environments, especially through the content and materials and the pedagogy. So if we had to play around with some big ideas, some themes and essential questions, what makes a strong friendship? What qualities do leaders need to succeed? How does adversity make us stronger? How can innovation improve society? The kinds of big ideas, big questions that lend themselves to study over time, to study from a number of angles and perspectives, to study with different genres and media, right? And that drive into lots of rich conversation. So in the chat, let's talk about this first shift from a model that anchors and centers on basic language instruction for the individual to one that is really about the learning environment to drive into advanced communication and literacy learning in collaborative spaces. What does this make you think about? Let's run the chat, let the chat roll. What does this have you thinking about as educators, as partners in this work? Yeah, the less is more, right? We are never going to teach everything. What we can do is teach to a toolkit and a set of ideas and ways of thinking and learning and a core knowledge that drives up the ability to learn and be curious and be motivated in the world. So we're thinking about our teaching more as the advanced organizer than about the content that we need to get through because this is the only time we're teaching, right? It's a different kind of mindset. Some more micro kind of levels in order to drive into tools over time. No question. And we've got that, thematic approach because we're going for that deeper learning engagement. And you're right, if we can get this right for educators, it's also much more motivating. If we can break through and get to a paradigm that is more about facilitation of the learning environment, it's a much longer run game for everybody, more engaging. No question, Jose, that we've got to have them engaged in the real world, that we have to bring the world to our learners, and we can't separate the learning from the learning about the world, right? It's got to be relevant. It's got to be applied. It's got to be connected to their environments, connected to the big picture. And no question that they are all global learners today. With these phones, right? And with the information overload, how do we drive up tools at the level of the learner to have them at their game, to develop a set of skills and competencies that will equip them for this next several decades? All right, in the interest of time, your comments are great. The collaborative teaching and learning, the sharing knowledge and skills, the exploring with, right, rather than teaching to, is sort of that paradigm shift in a lot of ways. It's also the case, right? At bottom, remember, I think the other case that we all want to agree upon is the basic English language skills are no longer enough of a tool either, right? So we're going to think about our model in terms of the basic in service of getting to the advanced in a lot of ways. Okay, let's talk now about design shifts 2 and 3. First, one from materials and lessons that are often too easy or too challenging. Either way, they're inaccessible, right? In a lot of respects. And also this notion of covering standards, right? That we're covering, we're trying to get through, we're trying to teach with units or readings that are too long. There is too much material, and we don't have, therefore, the opportunity to go deeper. What we're talking about now, and what I alluded to just moments ago, is because we're no longer going for mastery at that one moment in time. Instead, what we're doing is we're creating shorter units with more dynamic learning cycles that revolve around this authentic grade level text and big ideas and topics. It's a more modular approach to standards, such that we might cycle through and work on one standard, not get to mastery, keep moving in service of the content knowledge, the developing skills and competencies we're cultivating, and it's recursive. We may hit that standard again in the next unit or the next learning cycle, and we keep moving, rather than feeling we must exhaust this moment in time, have them master this material, and we never go back to it. And then we try to do that time and time again, and we are exhausted by trying to cover so much, and we are worried that we are not going deep enough. So we're going to step back and take a different kind of approach, this more modular approach, these shorter units, more dynamic cycles, and starting with grade level text, because of course, even if our students are developing their literacy and language competencies, they are very strong thinkers. So we need to scaffold them into content that is age appropriate and engaging. So here you can see, for example, rich global content. What's an example? Here we have it organized around an essential question. In this case, how do animals surprise us? In this unit, for example, there are 3 readings: an excerpt from a book on animal intelligence, an adventure story by Jean Craighead George, and a scientific article. There's also information in this unit about a National Geographic explorer as an example of the global citizenship, which might inspire our students for the kind of service learning project that we have embedded in these units. The project might be at an individual, a personal, school, or global level. But the idea is, first, we've got a big idea, an essential question that is worth grappling with, and that you can think about and enter into from a number of angles and genres in terms of text. And you can connect to individuals, their careers and their lives, and perhaps see a future self at the same time. With this unit design, we start with the launch where we've got that essential question and that academic vocabulary. From there, we've got these ways of engaging with the text and the media that we are working on and placing the content at the core, but we are reading, we are talking, we are writing, we are talking, we are reading, we are talking, we are moving through these cycles that maintain the content as steady and consistent while we're working on our communication skills. Every unit, in this case, we drive into what we call take action. A service learning project can be at the level of the personal, the school, the local, or the global. That's the relevance, that's the applied, right? So remember, we want this model that is a more dynamic, engaging approach, and that is very relevant and applied. So we're learning and we're applying. And as we're learning, we're discussing, we're writing, we're reading, and that works together. So launching this unit, for example, we start by exploring that essential question. We move into this kind of cycle, and for every reading, we have this kind of cycle happening, right? Which reminds us that we don't work on the skills in isolation. We work on the skills in the content, in the context of the content. We are using discussion and talk as a tool in and of itself, as a learning tool, and something that is that becomes not just in service of the lesson, but actually a learning tool to drive up our communication and our critical thinking and our problem solving skills. We're using writing tasks and assignments also in service of knowledge building. We are structuring them on what it is we're studying, right? If we're going to mount a great written argument, we have to have lots of study in order to get there. And we're going to involve lots of scaffolds and tools that, that remind us that the writing process starts much before we put the proverbial pen to paper or we flip open the laptop. But there's a lot of thinking and planning and organizing, and we might do that in discussion with our peers, with a protocol, for example. For every reading, we have this lesson sequence so that we are moving through the reading material in ways that teaches us how to read to learn and gives us tools and routines for working with text. In this example, here's a kind of feature example. We're preparing to read by surfacing prior knowledge, initial thoughts about the topic. That's a pretty straightforward and common approach. We are really pushing on the after reading as well. That is very much into the critical thinking. We're going to consolidate and demonstrate learning by responding to that guiding question: how can animals and people interact? And or even by performing an alternate ending to the story, understanding, again, in service of process over mastery and multiple perspectives, that this is not just about exactly what happened in this story, but about something much larger with lots of different ways it could have gone with the imagination. So here we are on shifts 2 and 3. One is the kind of materials that we're using, the volume, the length, the level, right? We're going for that grade level text. We're moving away from coverage and going to shorter units with more dynamic learning cycles. What does this make you think about? I think sometimes too, this is probably me with all of you, we're probably completely aligned, but I think often just at bottom, we really forget that in many ways, learning is a social enterprise, that if we don't collaborate and talk it through and work it through, right, with others, in the context of others in a learning community, it will be very hard to get there and get past the basic skills. No question that this is a sea change in a lot of settings, that getting to this spiraling curriculum and to this facilitated learning environment is a shift. It is certainly a paradigm shift, but it holds a lot of promise, and it certainly becomes a much tighter match with what's needed. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving. This fourth shift is a pretty straightforward one, and I think one we're probably all aligned on by virtue of being together here today with National Geographic Learning, which is that we all too often, our students don't necessarily see themselves, their lives and context, and even their future selves in the content. And if we're going to mount the kind of model that every student deserves and that reflects the kind of diversity that we thought about together at the beginning of this presentation, then we're going to have a more globally focused approach with varied texts, with visual literacy and media for really meaningful study and exploration. If it's not meaningful and the engagement's not there, then we have an uphill battle. So you can see here like an example of a, kind of the ways in which our diverse and growing population really can benefit from a content that's truly global, that's really in many ways relevant, more relevant, kind of improves motivation and learning outcomes. And it promotes the kind of global citizenship and international mindedness that in many ways is just so critical as we look ahead. We remind ourselves that this becomes the platform then for working on the rest of the skills. So here, for example, right, remember we're getting past just manual and digital texts. We're thinking about, we're working with our students on how to read photography and infographics, right? Infographics and data use and data science and data brokering as a really big and burgeoning area in society, in the workplace, et cetera. Building visual literacy, right? We're broadening our lens on what it means to be literate and what kinds of materials. We're as one example, if we circle back to this unit of study, which is about the animals, for example, here, learners are examining this photo and they're sharing what they notice and they wonder. And then they watch a video to find out more about the image from the photographer. And finally, they reflect on and share their learning in writing by selecting a photograph of their own to discuss with their peers, right? So we started with the unit, with the topic, the essential questions, the theme. We build out with text sets that are digital and manual print. Now we're examining other kinds of literacy. In this case, we're examining a photo as it's connected to the theme and the questions. Now we're bringing it to real world. By the way, there was a photographer who took this photo who's going to tell you more about it. And now you're going to bring this into your own life, right? So we're working in ways to use the content, the dynamic learning cycles, and as a springboard for my own toolkit, for my own background knowledge, but also for me to turn into that active learner who decides on a photo they might want to look at and then walk my peers through that. That's the kind of spiraling and active engagement that we're talking about. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to take temperature on these 4 shifts, which are critical everywhere, right across the globe today, and eventually need to work in concert with one another. I'm going to ask you to pause and think to yourself, if you had to pick one shift of these 4 that you think is most crucial at this moment in time, which one is it? So if you could only pick one shift that you've got to take in your instructional approach, which shift is it? And I would love to hear from each of you. Is it 1, to get students working more collaboratively? What's most pressing? 2, to use grade level text with language and content scaffolds? 3, to move away from coverage and go for deeper learning and engagement? And 4, to design with rich global content that features those multiple genres? What feels most pressing to you? No right answer here. I hope the votes are coming in. Can't wait to see the results. We'll give it another minute or so. How are we doing, Kitty? We've got results coming in.
Yep. We will stop like 50%. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it.
Share results.
Okay, great. Where did you land? To move away from coverage and go for deeper learning and engagement. That is also where we landed most in our last webinar on this topic as well. That in many ways that might be both the gatekeeper and the gateway, that if we can get away from the coverage and remind ourselves that that surface level mastery is not the same, does not carry one into the toolkit over time, that we've really got to go for that deeper learning and engagement, no question. Second is to design with rich global content that features multiple genres. Amazing, no question. Those two go hand in hand, right? If we started anywhere, we might start with the content and the shorter units, right? Which then lends itself to more collaboration and to any other kinds of shifts that are critical. Many of you suggesting, the smallest number, picking grade level text, not the most pressing, could be that you're already there for sure, which is great. Excellent, really good. Lots here to think about together for sure. So I'm going to take another minute or so and just suggest, I think if we had to zoom back out and sort of think about our conversation, I would place it in the context of what I think of as a very powerful theory of action. That if we deliver on these breakthrough learning environments and opportunities to cultivate global skills and competencies, we are developing youth and we are advancing society, right? That at core, if we can cultivate those global skills and competencies because of our learning environments and our opportunities for youth, then we are driving in to those 21st century skills and to a citizenship that is both confident, sort of college and career ready, but long game, engaged global citizens. So I thank you for your interest, for your own commitment to this work. There is tremendous work on the ground these days all over the world. And I think education could not be more important at this ever, but especially today. And I want to thank you for your interest and for this invitation. It's fabulous to have a chance to talk with all of you and work with all of you. And we may have time potentially, Kitty, for one or two questions.
I think there's just one question in the Q&A.
Okay,
So,
great. Let's see.
Zoe, yeah, if you can see the question is asking.
Yeah, so Zoe says, how do we use this format when we're not using the lift books? Great question. I mean, certainly these design principles lend themselves to any kind of curriculum development work, right? That at the end of the day, those 4 shifts could be applied and even developed, instantiated with your own materials, but you're probably going to want to revisit your existing materials, think about where to supplement and how to build in the learning cycles to get to where we want to. But if we've got grade level text, we've got those varied text sets and genres, and we're organizing our sets into units of study on a topic, and we are not genre specific, looking at digital, manual, print, and then we are engaging in that sort of, in my view, in the read, talk, write, talk cycle. We're 90% there, Zoe. So I think you need not necessarily look to lift as much as look to an approach with the right, both materials, but the pedagogy and the learning environment as well. And I actually think that brings us right to time anyway, Kitty, but
Yes,
it's really wonderful.
It's great session. And thank you very much, Nonie, it's fantastic, okay? And very informative, as lots of attendees also said in the chat. And yes, Nonie?
No, thrilled to be here. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, so thank you all again to join this session today. Before you leave, I have a few things to mention. So first, immediately after session, you will be directed to a feedback survey. Lots of you ask about the survey link, so you will get it. And then do let us know what you think about our webinar. And as part of our content-based English webinar series, we will also be hosting another one in December. And we hope you can also attend. that webinar will be presented by our National Geographic Learning's content-based English publisher, Janine Boylan. If you are interested in staying in touch, please do sign up for our monthly content-based English newsletter. So I will put it in the chat for now. All right. Okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so which includes lots of invitation to upcoming virtual events, blog posts, and publishing updates, etc. So you got the sign up link there. Also, to learn more about our content-based English learning program. So Lou, if you can help me put that in the chat, please do visit our content-based English learning program website. And you can also contact our your local National Geographic Learning rep here. Okay. So just last but not least, be sure to join our online community for teachers of English on our social media channels. All right. Okay, so where you can receive information about our events, practical classroom tips, exciting real-world content, and also new product information. Thank you again for joining today's session. Okay, thank you, Nonie, for this great presentation.
Good night from Boston. Take care, everybody.
Bye.